I'm about to say a word that's going to make half of you want to walk out because it sounds so boring, but bear with me, it'll be worth it. That word is 401ks. And the reason this matters is because 401ks are devastating the planet. But there's hope because they can also be saving the planet. So I'm going to tell you about 3 ways that 401ks can save the planet, and that's through voting shares, through lowering emissions, and it turns out that we can better protect the savings of everyday Americans by doing that. Let's first talk about voting shares. A lot of people don't realize this, but anytime that you're invested in a mutual fund or an ETF, you have the power to influence the action of some of the biggest companies in our economy through voting your shares. Just in the past few months, JP Morgan, Bank of America, some of the biggest banks had shareholder proposals to stop financing new fossil fuel development projects. And every person who's invested in those companies through funds had your shares voted on your behalf. Who here knows how they voted on those shareholder proposals? I bet no one. It's a super important way that we can all exercise our power, and anyone who invests in a 401k has that power. I also want to talk about the emissions impact that 401ks have, something most of us don't think about. If you were to switch to EV, install solar, go vegan, never fly again, only buy recyclable things, you would save 16 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Now that's important, but if you were to just switch your 401k to a fossil-free fund, you would save 532 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. That's 33 times your annual savings by doing everything else in your life that you can do. The same is true for companies. Mercer came out with a study this past September that looked at the emissions from 401ks of the S&P 500 companies, the biggest companies in our economy. On average, their financed emissions from their 401ks are 33 times higher than their direct emissions, their scope 1 and 2 emissions, 33 times higher. I came across this problem firsthand when I was running my first company. It's called IR Labs. We spun a technology out of MIT that makes data centers and supercomputers more energy efficient by using light to move data between chips. And I was traveling around the world talking about the future of supercomputing and of AI. But meanwhile, when we set up a 401k plan for our employees, I was asking for a single climate-friendly investment option in that lineup, and it ended up taking over 3 years and a lot of persistence to get a single climate-friendly option in the lineup. And I ended up realizing that it wasn't just me, I wasn't alone. Over 99% of people do not have a single climate-friendly investment option in their lineups. That ranges from climate tech companies like IR Labs all the way to the biggest companies in our economy, Microsoft, Apple, Google, where there are movements of employees who've been asking for climate-friendly options for years and not getting them for similar reasons to why I, as CEO, asking our service providers wasn't getting them either. And why is that a problem? Well, it's not only for the moral reason of climate change, it's also because Americans are being forced to risk their life savings by investing in this way. Fossil fuels have been extremely volatile. S&P Global, the company behind the S&P 500 index, has been releasing information on the volatility of the different sectors in the S&P 500 index. And the energy sector, which is code for fossil fuels, there's no non-fossil fuel company in the energy sector, was the most volatile sector between 2010 and 2020 at 20% volatility. Now, compared to the S&P 500 at large at 12%, it's massive. Fossil fuels have been risky. They also have had lower returns over that same type of retirement time scale, the longer-term time scale. So if you plot the S&P X Energy Index, which is the S&P 500 minus the fossil fuels, against the S&P 500 over a 10-year period, it turns out you would have come out ahead by not investing in fossil fuels over the past 10 years. Now, if you project that forward, it gets worse. The Energy Information Administration just released data last week showing expected growth in oil demand moving forward, and it falls off a cliff as soon as next year. So this is an industry in decline, and requiring all Americans to invest in the fossil fuel industry is kind of akin to requiring everyone to invest in the horse and buggy industry of 1910. It just doesn't make sense. The writing's on the wall. People like driving electric cars. The combination of solar, wind, and battery backup is less expensive than fossil fuel power generation in the US today. Why force everyday Americans to invest in this really risky industry? So why do we have no other option? Well, if you look at the numbers, it becomes pretty clear. 401ks have about $1 trillion invested in the fossil fuel industry, and that makes up about the equivalent of 37% of the market cap of US fossil fuel companies combined. It's a massive portion of the money that they have invested in them, and it makes sense because endowments, family offices, foundations, sovereign wealth funds have been pulling out, probably not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because they see that writing on the wall of this being an industry in decline. So the fossil fuel industry has been very focused, especially in the past year, on making sure that everyday Americans in 401ks don't have the option to stop investing in them. Influence Map just came out with a map showing how fossil fuel company dollars have been directly influencing political outcomes, requiring pension funds to keep investing in the fossil fuel industry. There's been a war on ESG investing, anti-woke capitalism that has emerged over the past year, directly funded by the fossil fuel companies who are terrified of losing a third of the dollars that are currently invested in them. The good thing is, there's hope on the horizon. So the greenhouse gas protocol is the gold standard that companies use to define how they should be measuring their emissions. And until now, it hasn't mentioned 401k emissions, but it's going through an update, and it's expected to start including 401ks in this new update that's expected to come out in about 2 years, in 2025. At Sphere, we're helping companies measure their emissions from their 401ks. Sphere is my second company that I started, and our platform that we're releasing is called the Atmosphere, and it's helping sustainability teams at companies measure the emissions from their 401ks and understand how to reduce those emissions by working with their benefits teams and really speaking the language of the fiduciary duty that's involved in 401ks to help make the case that we should really be doing better on 401ks. We also created what is really the easy button in terms of fund options to be added to 401k plans. It's called the Sphere 500 Climate Fund, and it checks all the boxes that fiduciaries need to see to be able to add a climate-friendly option to their lineup without worrying about getting sued for not following the fiduciary process. So low fees, 99% correlation to the S&P 500. This does not feel like a risky option to be adding to a 401k plan. And it's climate friendly in that it doesn't invest in fossil fuels, it lowers emissions, and we vote our shares for the planet. So we voted for those shareholder proposals at the big banks to stop financing fossil fuel projects, whereas the big asset managers that are most widely used in 401ks all voted against those proposals. So we're on a mission to get a climate-friendly option in every 401k in America. And we're not alone. We're part of a coalition of nonprofits and for-profits that have been working really hard to green 401ks. And we have a pretty exciting plan for this fall that I wanted to give you all a heads up about. It's called the March for Fossil Freedom. And this is going to be a history-making digital march down Wall Street together with the internet for a week. And the way that it works is anyone can go to the website, enter their email, upload some pictures of themselves, and they get an AI-generated image of them participating in the march. This means anyone can participate from anywhere around the world and get a pretty epic looking image of them walking together with the internet down Wall Street to post on social media, saying something like, I'm virtually marching on Wall Street this week to stop Americans from being forced to invest their savings in fossil fuels. The idea is that we'll take over people's social media feeds during that week with these images to really raise awareness of the fact that we're all forced to invest in fossil fuel companies. We're all not allowed to vote our shares the way we want to, and we want that to change. If we're successful, the impact will be massive. When we're successful, the impact will be massive. We'll be able to move billions, trillions of dollars from voting against climate proposals at the biggest companies in our economy towards voting for those climate proposals, and really safeguarding the value of those companies in a changing world where climate change is real. Also, people oftentimes ask me, what's the impact of divestment? Does it really matter? And when they ask that, I like to point them to the example of the anti-apartheid movement, where a lot of people credit the divestment movement as really contributing to the success of the anti-apartheid movement. If we divest, we shine a spotlight on an issue. Money talks in a way that words alone don't, and we can really have a massive impact by divesting. So what can you do? Number one, if you work at a company with a 401k, ask your HR for a climate-friendly option. Number two, join the march in the fall. Keep an eye out for our information about that, and you can always email me to learn more. And number three, if you have any investments, move them over to a climate-friendly investment, because it matters how your shares are voted, and moving money at scale really shines a spotlight on an issue and can lead to real change. And divesting isn't just about values. Climate-friendly investing makes good financial sense. So money talks, and let's make it shout for the planet. Thank you.